Hello, and today we've got Jimmy Sandison, former Hearts football player. Hi Jimmy, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, Angus. Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Let's start off. What was your first memory of playing football?
Well, I could take you back to a very small child, born in Muirhouse in Pennywell, and I was allowed to go and kick a ball downstairs. I lived in a vertical village called Maycourt, one of the first landings there, and my mother was allowing me to kick a ball downstairs, and that was absolutely fine. But I remember the kind of development that was just knocking it off garage walls and doors and playing on the actual road. There was drying greens just ahead of me. I could go in there and smash a ball about. But the development from that was there was a group of older kids up the hill, and after a couple of months of me kind of kicking the ball about, and their ball coming over the garage roof, and me kicking it back to them, they invited me up the hill to play with them. And I remember Mother speaking about this many years ago, how she thought that was a really big thing for me, because I would be maybe 5 or 6, and these guys would be 15 or 16. So you can imagine them 2 or 3 times my age, and they invited me up for a wee kickabout. And then they invited me up the next week for another wee kickabout. So my mother kind of felt that was a big development in the start of my football career. Yeah. As I say to you, I was quite a young kid. So something that was my first recollection of kind of playing football, not at any kind of high level, but just playing with kids, but playing with kind of bigger boys, as my mum would call them.
Who was your first grassroots club? Did you join a team when you started playing?
Yes, well, my first recollection of football was kind of Silverhouse Primary School, maybe 5 or 6, and then after that, then came along. My father knew the guys that run St Bernard's club, so got myself involved there, probably about the age of about 6 or 7, and then just played club football and school football, and then that just progressed from Silverhouse. Stayed with St Bernard's for a number of years. I went from Silverhouse into Craig Royston, played for the school team, and continued to play for St Bernard's. Yeah. And I played for them for probably 10, 11 years, up to about 15, 16, 17 years old. Was the kind of schoolboy and the club football.
Who was the first professional club you signed for?
Well, the first professional club I signed for was Hearts, but just previous to that, round about 16, 17, I got an offer to trial for the Scottish Schoolboys. Right. And as soon as I got a couple of trials with Scottish Schoolboys, it was amazing how many professional clubs came along to watch that. And but the first club I actually got affiliated with was Terry Christie at Meadowbank Thistle. He invited me along off the back of a couple of good performances from the Scottish Schoolboys to train me at Meadowbank Thistle. And I trained at Meadowbank for about a year, plus playing for the school, plus playing for my club, and plus playing 1 or 2 of these Scottish schoolboy trials, which was really good. Again, at that time, I got a little trial for Rangers through Ibrox, or the park right next to Ibrox. So there was a number of then clubs beginning to sniff about just because of the Scottish schoolboys scenario. And again, playing for the Scottish schoolboys, I played at Tynecastle one night, and I remember it well. I actually remember Mum and Dad talking about it many years ago. I didn't play that well that night. This is a strange thing they always kind of laughed about, because they'd obviously seen my development and mentioned a couple of games that I played quite well. But this particular game at Tynecastle, they thought that I didn't play very well. And right after the match, when we came out, I think it finished 1-1. We were playing the Hearts under-18s, and we were kind of 17-year-old kids from all the different schools in the area. And my mum and dad were approached by Walter Bothwick at the time. And Walter Bothwick asked us to come through and have a chat. And that was the start of the negotiations, how they wanted me to sign a contract. So it was from that Hearts made the offer of me to sign a professional contract. So, and that was when I take you back to the 17 then, kind of 17, 18, around about 1983. So that was the first professional club that made me an offer of signing. I was actually quite surprised that, as I said to you, I was training with Meadowbank Thistle for a wee while, and I thought they might have done something, but it just didn't progress with them. So,
were you a Hearts fan growing up? Was that like your dream to become a Hearts player?
My dream was I always wanted to play football. Was it a dream to play for Hearts? It would have been a dream to play for anybody, to be honest with you. I just wanted to play football. It was just unbelievable. It was such a big club. I didn't expect to go as high as I'd then been thinking about football clubs, and I thought maybe a 5 team or a smaller team or maybe no as big as Hibs and Hearts or anything like that. And I actually was quite surprised, as I said earlier, that Middlebank Thistle didn't make any kind of steps in the right direction. But when this club came along, when Hearts came along, it didn't matter what they were going to say to me. As soon as somebody showed interest and asked me if I wanted to sign, the answer was yes. And then I became a great lover of the club.
Can you remember your first professional game, your debut?
My debut, well, yes. I can take it back. When I first joined there, I was part-time, so I was kind of playing part-time football with them. But the first time when I go through the door as a full-time professional was the following year. So you're looking about 1984, kind of 18-ish, 17, 18. And then we play, I was just actually thinking about that. We played down at Berwick Rangers in the East of Scotland Shield. And it's a combination of reserves, but there's a lot of first team guys there. So that was my first recollection of thinking I'm playing in the first team and beginning to get a wee bit of recognition there. But when I speak to people and they say, well, when was your first time you were actually in the first team? The first time I broke through to the first team would be it was 1985. But then I'm kind of in and out the team, not in and out the reserves, playing quite regularly. But I then get on the bench for the first team away, would you believe it, at Ibrox against Rangers. And that was kind of the end of the 85 season. My first full game, I'm kind of in and out the team again, bench, coming off, going back into reserves, still trying to develop. At the start of the 1986 season, I get my first start and I play against Celtic in the very first game, the very first home game of that season. And any Hearts supporter will tell you, 86 was the season at the end of that year. We were very close to winning all sorts of stuff. So, yeah, that's what I can recollect. But my debut is coming off the bench at Ibrox. I can remember my starting debut, running down the tunnel at Tynecastle as a young kid, of my first start. And actually, one of the memories I was thinking about this morning was there was my assistant head teacher, a guy called Bob Aitchison, was up on the tunnel as you run out the tunnel at Tynecastle in the old main stand. He was up there, and I remember coming out and just walking out slowly and starting to run. And you can imagine the huge roar of, the place was jam-packed with Celtic supporters, Hearts supporters, absolutely rammed. And I remember just somebody shouting, "Jimmy, Jimmy, Jimmy," and I turned up, and there was my assistant head, Bob Aitchie, just pointing down and saying, "All the best, son." And I'm thinking, my goodness me. And then you're going out onto this stadium, and I'm thinking, my goodness me, for the wee boy that was playing football, doing in his, the grass area or the garages, here I am coming out to Tynecastle, 18, 19, just overawed with it, and thoroughly enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. As you can see from my background, I like my football kits. But what were the best and worst kits you played in?
It's strange because a lot of the kits I wore, I never thought any of them were really poor. I actually I was always honoured to wear them. One of the ones that sticks in my memory from a young kid was one of the first photographs I got taken at Tynecastle was in the grey away strip. It was a metre. Yep. Over the front of it. It was a grey one with maroon shots. I think obviously the first team in maroon, obviously. But that was one that stuck in my head. Again, my parents were always very honoured with the very first photograph you get taken as a professional footballer. That kind of stuck in my head. I think it was a white away one, which I quite liked. But you can imagine after that, they're all good maroon ones. And some of the guys I speak to always remember the sponsors, Meter Copiers, Miller Homes, Thorn Security. But that was one of the ones that I used to it kind of brings back a good memory, the kind of grey away one with the Meter Copiers over the front of it.
That's good. What was your best celebration?
Do you know, it's strange. I mean, I was never, when I first went to Hearts, I went as a midfield player, and I always like anybody, you want to score goals. Eventually, kind of found out that I wasn't very good at midfield, so they put me back, and very rarely ever, got forward over the halfway line. The manager, Alec MacDonald, always said, guys, it's not like nowadays you look at, guys, stay in your position, stay where you're meant to be, let the people who are forward do the forward kind of thinking. So I never really got anywhere near the goals. But this one time, I was up at Pittodrie. He started me. He actually dropped Gary Mackay that day, which is very strange. Gary Mackay being who he was, maybe just a wee bit off form. He told me I was starting, Gary was on the bench, and I started that day at Pittodrie, middle of the park, and just said to myself, here's a wee opportunity, try and do well, didn't do something daft. And I managed to score one of the first goals there. You probably remember it yourself. And just previous to that, we'd actually hammered wee Robbo, because the amount of goals that Robbo scores, he just used to run back for the halfway line back and do no celebration. So me and Crabble would say to him, you must do something for the supporters, give them a wee dance of some sort, or do something to make them, rather than just run back. So me and Crabble tried to teach him a couple of wee moves in the boot room, the old boot room at Tynecastle, and Robbo was just dreadful. I mean, great goal scorer, but he couldn't move, he couldn't get his hands going. And so me and Crabble used to do it all the time to show him. And in this one occasion, I scored the goal. Robbo's kind of 25 yards away from me, and Crabble's at the back of me. So as I turn, we look at each other and we think, and we just start this stupid wee dance that we try to teach wee Robbo. And I've been, ever since that day, I've been absolutely hammered for it.
Who's your best teammate you had? As like a mate, that sort of thing, as a friend?
Yes, aye. If I go back to the start again, when I first went through the door, you go into, you can imagine the changing room, everybody's got their pegs, mine's is right in the corner. And beside me was a guy called Malky Murray. And me and Malky went through the reserves and we broke into the first team roughly about the same time. He was a right back. I was kind of midfield, but going back to his sweeper. And we changed together. We would somehow get involved in exercises together. And whenever we went away, we roommated. He invited me up. He used to stay in Buckie. And during the close season, I'd go up to Buckie, and he'd maybe come down to my place. And we just grew up there. And eventually, I remember Alan McDonald many years ago telling me the story. After 3 or 4 years, they thought that me and him were very similar. And because of the circumstances at Hearts, there was a wage structure, and there was a level of finances. And they had to decide between me and Malky. And for me, it was good because they decided me, but Malky then had to move on. They couldn't keep the two of us on. And I always kind of go back to that and think, well, that was a wee bit sad, because I actually thought Malky was a really good player. And if they hadn't promoted me, then I might have went somewhere else. And my career might have went down the way. So he was my kind of first real friend in football. But as you imagine, I mean, I still see Alan McLaren, I still see Crabbo, I still see Gary, I still meet Eamon Bannon. What a kid's a good pal of mine. We'll still meet once a year, just to kind of recollect all the good old days. I still speak to Big John Martin at Airdrie. I mean, I speak to an awful lot of guys. So, I've got many friends. Aye. But Malky was my first real football colleague and friend at the early days.
Who was your worst teammate in terms of playing pranks and stitching you up, that sort of thing?
There was quite a few. There was quite a few. But when I go back to the earlier days, one that comes into my head very quickly would be George Cowie. George Cowie was a bit of a clown at times, and he loved a wee prank. And there was men in the old days. There was Willie Johnston. Remember Willie Johnston, who played for Rangers in Scotland? He was an older character who would like to play wee tricks on you and stuff. And Davy Bowman, these guys. There was lots of guys at Tynecastle that loved a wee carry on. And I remember one situation, or a number of situations, and the management had got involved in this and kind of killed it, because what was happening was the guys that were going out to train would go out, and the guys who were injured would go through the back room with Alan Ray, do an upper body circuit or get treated, and they would only be in for about an hour or so. And when they would come back to the main dressing room, we'd obviously still training. So what some of them would do is they'd mix up your clothes, or they'd nail your shoes to the floor, or they'd cut your tie, or they'd do all sorts of stuff. And then you'd come back in, and it'd be hilarious. But after a while, you're losing your shoes, you're losing your tie, you're losing your shirt. So eventually we all started to come in with the worst gear on in the world, because we didn't care if that got cut or ruined. And it was all vendettas after that. I mean, Josh Cow was one of the best. Kenny Black was good at it too. And then you're starting, I mean, it was a great dressing room for camaraderie, pranks, carry-ons. It's terrific, absolutely terrific. But eventually we had to say, listen guys, we have to stop cutting gear here and nailing shoes to the floor. So it was, I would probably elevate Kenny Black and Josh Cowie, the pranksters.
What was the last football game you played?
My last professional game I played was at Shielfield Park,
right,
against Berwick Rangers, and that was for Stenensmuir.
All right.
And what it was I'd retired because the injury had been at liquidation, and my old chairman, George Pete, was at Stenishmere, and he asked me to come along. The team were kind of doing poorly. He wanted a kind of older head at the back to kind of steady the ship, because they were pretty close to being relegated. And they needed a number of points over that season not to get relegated. And I remember that was the last game I played. It was the last game of the season, and we needed a point, and we drew 1-1. So that the club didn't get relegated, which was great. And I then just decided that I'd had enough, because I was training. I remember that morning, I was training with a guy who was half my age, 18-year-old. I was 36 at the time. And I thought, I've had enough, because he was running past me, making me feel old. So I thought my body was beginning to tell me, let's go out and let's not do any more. So that was my last game at Shielfield Park.
You're now a commentator for Hearts TV. What's the best Hearts match you've covered?
I've covered a number of really good ones. What I would have to say, it'd have to be the Scottish Cup final 5-1. I would have to, because every game I still get very nervous when I go along. I still get annoyed with what I'm watching. I still very passionate about it all. I'm no one for jumping up and down when goals go in, because I'm trying to see what's going to happen, if the team's going to come back or whatever it is. But that game and the build-up for that game was just, I've never experienced it in my life. And I was so nervous because I didn't want my team to get beat. I didn't want the supporters to go home annoyed. I had good friends on the opposite end and the Hibs end too. I just didn't know what I wanted. I obviously wanted Hearts to win, but I didn't know, and so much relief, and then it turned to so much joy, because the game was so good to watch, so many goals, so many funny things going on. And then the other side of that was when we were coming home after the match. We managed to pick up. We met Robbo, who'd been doing a wee bit in the stadium. We met him at Hart Hill, and me and Alan White, Jockey had his convertible car. We had it down with the roof off it, and we drove right back into Gorgie with the roof down, with Robbo in the back, myself and Jockey with music on. And I just remember punters kind of walking back and looking in and saying, "There's Robbo in it and on." It's just the whole game, the atmosphere, the result, the pressure being off, winning the Scottish Cup, the Robbo thing, the car down the Gorgie Road, the tons of people. Just a memory that I'll take to my grave. Loved it.
With you being a Hearts TV commentator, you obviously go to a lot of games. But when was the last time you had to pay for a ticket to go to a football match?
I've never paid for a ticket in my life. Sorry?
Wow. That's some record.
No, is that? Oh, dear me. No, I've been very fortunate. Every time I've wanted to go to football, I've people have known about it and they've looked after me, or I've made a little phone call ahead and said, "Listen, I'm going to come along. Can I meet you after? Or if you're going to come along to the game, I'll leave you 2 tickets." I generally do that with the purpose of knowing that hopefully they will leave me a couple of tickets. But as far as answering your question, when was the last time I bought a ticket? I don't think I have. And I'd like that to continue, please.
That's great. It's been a pleasure having you on, Jimmy. Thank you.
You're more than welcome, Angus. Thank you.
Thanks.